On the surface, the Jighead Minnow is the easiest bass fishing technique. You just put a minnow on a jig head, cast at the fish you want to catch, and they bite. But if we dig a little deeper, you will realize that isn't always the case, and there are many little tricks that will drastically increase the number of fish you catch. Today we will dive into those tricks by taking you through the gear you need, how to rig it, and how to fish it to ensure you can catch more fish than everyone else on the Jighead Minnow. So to start off, let's talk about the gear you need to fish this technique. This is a really simple technique that you probably already have the gear for, and this is also not a new technique. This thing's been out a very, very long time. I've used it for crappie fishing many years ago, perch fishing. You can catch all kinds of species with this little bait right here. And the setup is very simple. I'm actually using the Cashin Element Ned Rig rod here. And the reason I like this rod, it's short so I can make accurate casts, because especially when you pair it with livescope, I want to make very accurate casts. So this is a 6'10", and it is a medium power with a fast action. That is very important. The other rod I do have up on the deck up here is the drop shot rod, which is a 7'1" medium light fast. So if you're using some of those lighter jig heads, it depends on how deep you're fishing this. If you're fishing very shallow and you're using light jig heads that are 1/16 ounce, you can use that medium light rod and you'll get a further cast. But for the most part, I use something between a 3/16 and a 3/8 ounce jig head. And if that's the size you're using, this rod will cast just fine, and it has a little bit more backbone to actually get the hook into the fish's mouth. So I like to use a little bit heavier wire hook than like a very light wire jig head, so that when I stick these fish, especially some big smallmouth like we're gonna catch today, these fish have very tough mouths, and you need to get that hook in there good to make sure you don't lose them. And that fast tip allows you to shake the minnow like you're supposed to do. When you're shaking that bait and you're just making gentle contact with it, it's going to cause that bait to roll side to side through the water column and look like a dying bait fish as it's struggling its way through the water. And that is the irresistible action that you're trying to get with this bait. Whether you use live scope or not, if you are getting that action with the bait, that's how you're gonna catch the most amount of fish, and that is the secret to this bait. We have a Shimano Sedona on here. Again, we're fighting some big smallmouth up here on Lake Erie. I like a reel with some really good drag. This is the 2500 size, so that when I get those fish up to the boat, they can run, pull drag as they need to, and not pull the hook out. And then I have it spooled up with 10-pound Suffix Revolve this year. This is the lime green color. I used to use the 832, that would work as well. The key is just having a very thin diameter line for two reasons. One is going to get you castability again, so the thinner the line, the further your cast. But also that thin diameter line is going to get down in the water more than a thicker diameter line. So you're going to get a better connection to your bait, causing it to have better action and be able to fish it a little bit deeper in the water and have a direct connection to it. The lime green color allows me to tell where that bait is in the water column, especially on a bait like this where you're going to count it down in the water column or watch it on live scope. I want to be able to see my braid so I can tell if that bait has laid slack and is laying on the bottom, or if it's still floating up in the water column and I need to work my bait through the water column. And don't worry if you're worried about the fish seeing the braid. We tie a fluorocarbon leader on here, so I have an FG knot to 8-pound test fluorocarbon, and I have about 15 foot of it on here, so it goes from the reel all the way out the rod tip and back down to the bait. So on a 7-foot rod, that's about 15 foot of fluorocarbon line. Now when you come down here to your jig head and your bait selection, the first thing we're gonna do is tie on our bait with a loop knot. The knot is actually more important than anything else down here. This is the only time, besides a topwater lure, I use a loop knot on my bait, and that's going to allow it to roll in the water without it being held captive with a Palomar knot. So if you were to Palomar knot this on here and your knot is straight up against that bait, your bait has very limited range of motion and it's all in the rod at that point. But if you have the loop knot in here, it has very free range of motion, so as you're shaking that bait, it will roll much better in the water. Now for the jig head, there's two options that you can go with. You can either go with a lead jig head or a tungsten jig head, and it really depends where you're fishing and what you're using. So if you're using live scope, there is no denying that tungsten will give you a better result and you'll see that bait a lot better on the screen. But they're also very expensive. I either use the 6th Sense Finesse swim bait heads, so I use them for my swim baits, but I also use them for my damiki rig heads because they have a straight vertical line tie, or I use the Queen Tackle Tungsten livescope jig heads. Those things are awesome. And then the last thing you're going to need is a bait. And for the bait, you can go crazy on bait options here. And really the biggest thing is matching the hatch to the body of water that you're fishing. So if your fish are feeding on small bait fish, like on Lake Erie here, we're fishing for fish that are eating emerald shiners and baby perch. They're gonna be about 3-4 inches long at most, and they're gonna be a light silvery color with a darker back. So today we've been using an electric shad, Z-Man scented jerk shads. The scent probably helps with smallmouth as well. I've noticed it to make a little bit difference as well. The other thing that I use is the juggle minnow. A 4-inch juggle minnow would work perfect for this as well. But if your fish are feeding on other bait fish or larger bait fish, you can go with multiple other options. So I have all the sizes of the scented jerk shads up to the 5 and the 7-inch. So if I'm fishing for fish that are feeding on big gizzard shad like this, I can use a 7-inch bait and still get that dying bait fish profile. The reason this technique works so well is because it is the most natural profile that you can get down there in the water. It can mimic exactly what those fish are feeding on with the dying presentation. So your color needs to be locked in, your action needs to be locked in, and your size needs to be locked in to get the best results. And then the size of your jig head, I mentioned that you can use a variety of sizes. Really, you just want to have the lightest jig head you can get away with that can stay down in the water column at the depth you need. So whether you're using live scope or not, if there's wind blowing and you need a heavier jig head, or there's current, or the depth of water is deeper, to get that bait down there and to fish it at a relatively quick pace, that's the size jig head you're gonna have to go with. A 3/16 to a 1/4 ounce is the most used size that I have, and then sometimes I'll go down to like a 1/8 or up to a 3/8 depending on the conditions. And then the only thing left to rig one of these up is to just thread your minnow straight on the jig head, and you want it as straight as you can possibly get it on here. That's going to give you the most natural action. So now that we have the full setup ready to go here, let's go out on the water. We're going to show you where and how to fish this, catch some fish along the way, and show you how effective this bait can be with or without live scopes. Now that we talked about all the little tricks you need to rig this thing up to get even more action out of this bait, let's show you how to actually retrieve this and how to work it through some of these pieces of cover to catch some fish. Now I am going to show you how to do this with live scope and without, because some people might not have it, but also if you do have it, pairing it together is deadly. There's no denying that. But if you don't have live scope, it doesn't matter. Basically what I would do is I am in 10 foot of water. So I would open my bail and I would count 1, 2, 3, 4. So now that I know it takes 4 seconds to hit the bottom in 10 feet of water, I know it falls about 2.5 feet per second. So every second, get 2.5 feet. I want it to go to 5 feet, I let it sink for 2 seconds, and so on. So if I wanted to cast, I'm using 360 as well over here. I know there's a rock pile over here. I could cast it over there. I want it to go to about 7.5 feet. I'd go 1, 2, 3, and then I would just start shaking this back, and all I'm doing is picking up the slack with my reel, and I'm actually moving the bait with the rod, almost like a jerk bait. So I'm just twitching the rod tip, and as soon as I feel contact with the bait, I'm going to set my line back towards it. And I'm doing it very rapidly, so I'm pulling till I get contact with the bait and setting it back very quickly. And that quick movement is what's causing that bait to roll within that loop knot. And then I'm picking up the line with the reel and slowly pulling it towards me. But I don't want to be reeling the bait in. I want to be moving the bait with the rod. So I'm going to abruptly shake it like this. I don't want to overshake it. That's one of the biggest mistakes when you're twitching it like this very aggressively up and down and moving the rod and the bait a lot. You're causing that bait to dart up and down as opposed to roll. All you want to do is hit the bait so that you feel it and then give it slack, and that makes it roll as opposed to go up and down. So we're just going to keep shaking this thing back towards us, and obviously this isn't the cast I'm going to catch a fish on because I'm talking through it, but that's what I would do. I'd throw it towards the cover, whatever I want to fish it at. Even if you're fishing in a pond, you know your pond is 10 feet deep, you know it's got 2.5 per second, so I'd throw it out. I'd count it down halfway if I know the fish are suspended. 1, 2. I'd start my retrieve, and you just shake it back to you and work the bait back towards the boat slowly, and you can catch suspended fish even if you don't have live scope or can't see them. Now the other mistake that you make with this bait is when you kill it and you're letting that fall, you don't want it to fall through the school of fish, and we'll do that on live scope here. You don't want it to go right through the school of fish and then bring it back up through them, because bait doesn't do that. A dying bait fish isn't going to fall through a school of bait and come back up to the school of fish. and possibly get eaten. So it's going to try and evade the fish rather than fall in them. So you want this to float above their head and gently work over them instead of it fall down through and up through and down through and up through and do unnatural movements and falls like that. That is the key with this technique. Now let's try and put all this together and fish it on the live scope too and show you what we're doing. The only difference here is I can actually keep tabs on where my bait is in the water. So I can see there's fish over here. I'm gonna cast directly towards them. I'm gonna try and pick my bait up on the screen, which sometimes you can't even do that. And I want my bait to sit right on the bottom in this rock pile and briefly come right over their heads. So I'm just gonna slowly shake this thing through this rock pile. Ideally, you can find the school of fish or your bait and it helps you track them much better. Right now on this cast I didn't, but I know that I cast it in the general vicinity of that rock pile, so I'm still gonna fish it because I know I'm in the general area. I'm not just gonna bring my bait in because I don't think I'm in the area. Once I hit that spot, I wanna leave my bait in there as long as possible. And sometimes I'll scan around with my foot and see if I can pick the bait back up while it's in the cover. All right, so now let's get to fishing this thing effectively and see if we can catch some out of these rock piles. So I'm gonna put my head down with this live scope and we're gonna see if we can show you how to put all this together to catch some fish. And the biggest thing to talk about here, biggest misconception with this technique, is seeing the fish is only half the battle. I can see there's fish in this rock pile. Getting them to bite is a different story, especially when they've been pressured all day and it's glass calm out here and bluebird skies. That can be a very tough, challenging conditions to fish under and get fish to bite. A lot of times they'll look at this thing and they'll come up and sniff it and decide they still don't want it. So learning to use the live scope to determine the fish's mood and how they're acting and how you can adjust your presentation to get them to bite is the benefit of using this technology. It's not that you can just point at a fish and catch one whenever you see one. There we go. Didn't even see that one on the screen. Is this a big one? Nah, he's little. Couldn't even see that one on the screen. I couldn't see my bait, but I knew my bait was in the cover. So I just kept working it through there nice and slow. And it gives it that natural rolling, dying bait fish profile. Especially in the winter, these fish go crazy for it. Just because that is what they like to eat. They're out here to eat bait fish, and if you make it look like a dying bait fish, they're gonna bite it. All right, not a big one. We're gonna try and get one much bigger than that, but not a bad fish. We're gonna go ahead and throw her back and see if we can get another one out of this rock pile. There we go, another one. Could not even see my bait again. I'm just working it through there and they're biting it. This one's a little bit bigger. All right, not as big as I thought. She's still decent though. You can see the one benefit with this bait too, single hook, that's getting them every time and they are coming in the boat. She was barely hooked though, she almost came off. All right, we're gonna throw her back and we're gonna see if we can get an even bigger one than that. See you, girl. Smack. There she goes. Bunch of fish. Already got one on me. Got her. Not a big one. We're gonna throw her back. We're gonna try and get a bigger one. We're gonna try and get one up in that 4 to 5 pound range. But if you guys would like to get a piece of this action and catch smallmouth just like this, guide service link down below. We have now opened up our own guide service. And if you'd like to catch some smallmouth or largemouth like this with me, go ahead down below and check out the link and book a trip today. We're gonna throw her back. We're gonna catch another one, hopefully much bigger than her. There's one. That's a nice one. Oh gosh, look at that tubby one. Jighead minnow right in her mouth. Beautiful. While there's no denying that the jighead minnow is absolutely deadly on fish, it is not as easy as everybody makes it look. Some of these fish, you gotta entice them into bite. Sometimes you can't even see your bait on the screen, and it takes a lot of practice to be able to catch them like this. But if you wanna see how I set my live scope up to maximize your chances of catching fish like this, check this video out right here, hit the subscribe button down below, and thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.